Hello, everyone. This is Boniface, and it's so nice to see you here back again. Sorry I haven't posted much lately. I've been very busy with different writing projects, and I'm also working on another rather large video project I'm pretty excited about. It's going to be like a documentary style video essay on early Irish monasticism that I'm hoping will be out in a week or two. So look out for that. Today, I want to talk about something that's becoming increasingly important, and I'm seeing many Catholics bringing this up to me in conversation, which is the importance of maintaining spiritual balance, especially in light of the things going on in the church and in the world today. Even in the best of times, it is very challenging to maintain a balance in our spiritual life, and that's because our spirituality pertains to the things about us that are most central, that are most important, that are most fundamental, and that are often the most guarded or interior. And so when that part of us gets agitated, it can really throw us off. And that's why there's so much literature in the spiritual tradition of the church, both East and West, that is meant to help us be on guard against being thrown off in this way and to maintain a spiritual equilibrium in the midst of whatever life throws at us. But of course, it's even worse today because things are so off balance everywhere. There's a lot of chaos in the world, there's a lot of confusion and chaos in the church as well. And this is really just making it difficult for many people to maintain any kind of balance in their spiritual life. You have a lot of people on one side that are sliding into like a despondency or a despair, or who are just barely clinging on to faith. And then on the other side, you have people who are kind of deus vaulting with this extreme zeal that is bordering on imprudence and is in some cases pushing them to excesses that I think are not warranted by our faith or by our tradition, or as the scripture would say, a zeal, but not according to the Lord. And in a certain sense, I blame our toxic political climate. Everything has been infected by our awful politics to where we're almost starting to view the church uh, the way that we treat our moribund political systems. And I've written at length about this on the blog, so I'm not going to go into it here, but it's kind of like an infection where we start to relate to our faith the way we would relate to a political movement, with all the groupthink and the polarization and the negativity and all the things that make politics so unpleasant at this point in our history. And this really happens whenever we start to view our faith as a power struggle, because that is the dominant paradigm in the secular culture. Everything is a power struggle between the haves and the have nots. And if we start viewing our faith through that lens as well, as that this is just ultimately a power struggle, we're going to end up getting very imbalanced. Now, I especially want to address this issue of being spiritually unbalanced, relating to how we respond to what's going on. Because obviously, what is going on in the church is for the most part beyond our control. What is going on in the country is for the most part beyond our control. Um, in times like this, we really have to kind of go back to the maxim that a lot of things we just can't control. The only thing we have real control over is how we respond to things. And if we really believe what the faith teaches about the purificatory, is that a word, purificatory? The, let's just say purifying, the purifying power of trials, challenges, and suffering, then we really need to maintain that no matter what's going on around us, we can always, in some way, through the right disposition and the grace of God, turn this to our benefit. But also, we could just as easily turn it to our ruin. You think of someone who has a debilitating condition. Maybe you find out you have cancer, right? Which objectively is a negative thing. But what are you going to do with it, right? There's two ways you can respond. You can either offer this up to God and say, God, I have to deal with this, and through your grace, I will grow through this. I will learn various virtues. I will offer my sufferings up, and this will make me a better person by your grace. And so there's a real possibility of that happening, but there's also a possibility that we get angry and bitter, that we blaspheme God for handing us this trial, that we exercise ingratitude, and that the trial ends up actually making us worse. So whatever happens to us, whether good or bad, uh, how it's going to redound to our own future really depends on the disposition we have and how we react to it. So I really want to focus on this question of reacting to the things that are happening around us. Now, you might remember the papal condemnation of Americanism around the turn of the last century, like around the turn of the 20th century. And there was a lot going on with Americanism, but one aspect of Americanism was the prioritizing of the active virtues over the passive virtues. And this also was related to another movement, Josephinism, from the late 18th century in the Holy Roman Empire, where Emperor Joseph II, one of the enlightened despots of the Enlightenment, suppressed all contemplative religious orders, but not the active ones, not the orders that were engaged in teaching and hospital work, because he thought that they were useful. And so again, it's like a prioritization of the active over the passive. There's always a temptation to this, um, especially in the United States. I mean, Americanism is named after our country. There's a temptation to this. There's a temptation that when we get met with a challenge, when something happens, we want to face it with decisive action. That's the American way. It is to shoot first and ask questions later. It is to meet force with force. It is to come up against obstacles with bravado. It is to speak softly and carry a big stick, or sometimes to just speak loudly and carry a big stick. So this is always a temptation that when we are faced with something, that we're going to want to have this decisive, strong, bold reaction in the physical sphere, in the active sphere, and that we can solve anything through industrious, coordinated action. And sometimes this is so strong that we don't even realize it. Like something will happen and we will immediately think, what will we do? Like, what will my response be? Like we already take it for granted that we have to react with some action. We don't even often realize that sometimes we don't have to do anything. Sometimes action is called for. Certainly, there's many things in life that require bold, decisive action. But it's almost like we take it for granted that we need to respond. And if you felt this oppressive feeling, I just want to state that just because something has happened doesn't mean you need to do anything. You can take in what happened and contemplate it, and it doesn't mean that you need to offer a response. It doesn't demand any response. You don't have to do anything. Now, I have an article on the Unam Sanctam blog called The Dark Mirror of Faith, where I talk about how faith is very provisional. And in the life of faith, we have to get used to the idea of not always knowing. And I will link this article in the description, but I'm going to read a little bit from it here. Um, I say, all of us who live in faith must sojourn in a strange land. That is the essence of being a believer. You must grow comfortable with the sojourn, with the provisional nature of the journey. What does this mean concretely? It's obviously a good and praiseworthy thing to seek out knowledge, to learn, and to grow in understanding. It is good to seek as much certainty as we can get, but moderation in all things. You must also acknowledge your limits. There are some things you may never reconcile, and others that may take a long time to understand. This state of not knowing is okay, and it should be embraced. Understand that it is a normal part of faith to grapple with something. Perhaps it's part of our Western rationalist bias that makes us feel like our faith will be stronger once we've sorted everything out intellectually. I challenge you to consider backing away from that premise. You don't need to take a position on everything. You don't need to understand how all the pieces of something fit together. You don't need to reconcile every contradiction. You don't need to see clearly or have all the answers. Get comfortable with not knowing. The beginning of wisdom is admitting that you do not know as much as you think. Learn to say, I am still wrestling with this. I don't know what I think about it. If it pleases God, someday I will. That's a perfectly valid response to the conundrums that faith presents to us. To have faith is to wrestle with things. Accept that. That's from my article, the Dark Mirror of Faith, which like I said, I will link below. But I would like to posit that something is similar in the realm of action, right? We should get comfortable with the idea that no action is a valid response. We shouldn't feel paralyzed because we don't know what to do, because choosing not to act is a valid response to something as well. As many of you know, back in the day in another life, I used to be a politician. I was in political office. And I remember that whenever something would happen, there would be things that would happen in the community, and it would require the local government to respond. And our administrators and our lawyers, we'd sit down, and they would typically bring the elected officials a list of potential responses we could do, usually from the least assertive to the most assertive. And the first response on the list was always do nothing. And I really appreciated this because it was a reminder that doing nothing is always an option. That not choosing to take action is itself a way of responding that's a valid one. Not everything that happens to us, not everything we see going on in the church or the world requires us to get up and go do something about it. Now, I am not saying that inaction is the proper response to everything. I'm only reminding you that it is a response, and I think we should all go back and meditate on Ecclesiastes chapter 3. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted, etc., etc., right? There is a time for everything. Now, in terms of our spiritual lives, I have found personally that it's often a great consolation to divest myself of this burden of feeling like I'm personally responsible for acting in response to certain things. We do have to remember that the devil likes to agitate. He likes to make us lose our peace. The devil likes to sow confusion, and he likes to sow chaos. And given that he is walking around as a roaring lion, seeking whom he might devour, as the scriptures say, it really behooves us to think very carefully about our responses to what's going on in the church. And I personally have thought for a long time that the devil's strategy is much more clever than we give him credit for. I do not think the devil's strategy is as simple as the devil being like, I'm going to attack this. And then Catholics being like, oh my gosh, the devil's attacking that, so we have to respond by doing this, right? That's just much too simplistic. Think about any time you've ever played chess against someone who's really good, and man, it is incredibly frustrating. I don't even play chess because I get so frustrated, I will like slap the pieces off the board. But if you're playing against a really good chess player, they don't just have this strategy and you're like, oh, they're doing that, and therefore I need to counter with this. A really good chess player will screw you in such a way that you screw yourself while you think you are escaping from their attack, right? They will do something and you'll be like, oh, I have to get away from that. And in the act of you trying to oppose what they're doing, you end up screwing yourself with another attack that you didn't even see coming. I mean, a master chess player has, they can screw you over 6 ways from Sunday, right? Like they have multiple ways of getting you. And when they really get you in a good maneuver, it's a maneuver where your attempts to evade the maneuver are what executes the maneuver. Or think about the great military tacticians of history. For those of you who love history and who love military history, you know that the greatest tacticians in military history, they arrange these scenarios where an enemy army is destroyed in the act of thinking they are winning or thinking they are saving themselves. Maybe they are marching into an ambush, thinking that they are getting the upper hand, thinking that they are going to gain ground, and instead they march into something they didn't see. Or maybe there's a feigned retreat where they're leading the army this way, or maybe the enemy themselves are thinking they're retreating and they're actually running headlong into something different. So it's very similar in the military as well. The greatest military tacticians, they're not just being like, okay, I'm attacking you here, and therefore we have to meet force with force. I mean, sometimes that happens, but the great ones, they set it up to where it's like you're here, and the other army's like, okay, I'm going to do this, but really that just puts them up to get attacked by someone else from here, and then only too late do they realize that they were getting screwed over in a way they couldn't have foreseen. Now, is the devil smarter than a human chess player? Is the devil smarter than a human military tactician? Yes, he absolutely is. And if we can see these sorts of maneuvers executed in human games of strategy and things like warfare, we must assume that the devil is doing something very similar, but on a much higher level. And therefore, we should think that probably part of the devil's strategy that sometimes our reactions to things is what gets us, even when we think our reaction is what's going to save us, right? That would be, I mean, that would be the ultimate checkmate. If he does something and he gets us to respond thinking that we are fighting back, but the response is what screws us in the end. There's a principle in the Ignatian tradition of discernment of spirits where when you are feeling agitated or despondent, or you're in a sloth, that's when you don't make changes to your spiritual routine. You should only evaluate your spiritual routine and make changes to it when things are going well and you're making progress. But if you're in a dry spell, that's the time to just muscle through and keep doing what you've been doing. And if you, by the way, there's a good book about this, The Discernment of Spirits by Father Timothy Gallagher. I read this many years ago, and it was really helpful in terms of helping me moderate what sorts of decisions I made about my spiritual life. But one of the basic premises of Ignatian discernment is that if you're in a period of agitation, that's when you don't make changes to your routine, because of this very principle that when you're agitated, when you are upset, it's more likely that you're not thinking clearly. It's more likely that you're going to act impulsively, that you're going to that you're going to do something reactively, and that is not conducive to your good. So you need to only act when you're in a clear state of mind. I mean, in the context of your personal spiritual life, it would be like when you're when you're not in a dry spell or a sloth. But if we think about this in a societal way, or in the sense of the church, right? The church is in a very difficult spot right now. Does that mean we should suddenly start approaching the spiritual life in a fundamentally different way? Should we start approaching the church or the sacraments or the way we view Catholicism? Should we start changing, or should we kind of continue on? Now, I know that this parallel doesn't work exactly, but I think the basic premise is the same, that when we are agitated because something we hold near and dear to us, i.e., the Catholic faith, is being assaulted, or it's under attack, that's really touching us in a sensitive spot, and we want to be careful about how we respond. So we want to not respond impulsively. We want to not just meet force with force. We don't want to be like that person playing chess, that when we think our opponent is doing this, that we're just going to stupidly rush in headlong and end up actually doing exactly what our opponent wants us to do to checkmate us, because we didn't give enough forethought to our movements. Boniface, what are you getting at? Like, you're beating around the bush. You keep talking about our reactions. Like, what are you talking about specifically? I'm not. I'm not going to go there. I'm talking about, this has an applicability to all manner of things. Okay, this is a reflection based on many conversations I've had with people. So there's many things you can apply this to, but in general, I'm talking about anything where you feel agitated about what's going on in the world and you think like, or going on in the church, you think, well, I might have to do this, or I might need to do this. Yeah, maybe you do, but maybe you don't. Maybe you don't need to do nothing. Maybe you just need to keep on saying your prayers, going to confession, receiving the sacraments, doing the same old that you've been doing. Maybe that's all you need to do, honestly. And so the whole point of this talk is to just put that in your head, that just keep on keeping on is an option. We don't necessarily need to go farther than that. So I hope you find some relevance in this with what you're going through. I'm sorry if it was too long. I do have a tendency to ramble. Anyhow, I hope you guys are well. I'll pray for you. You say a prayer for me, and I'll talk to you again in the next video.